yesterday in Goroka, up in the highlands of PNG. Women in these communities experience some of the highest rates of violence against women on earth.
In the highlands, it's everyday business. Killing women, torturing women, wife beating is everyday business.
As part of our support to the informal economy, UN Women has mainly worked in the market space.
Simone Clarke, welcome to the Impact Leaders webinar. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here, Jeremy.
This is a conversation I've been really excited to have. Our partnership with UN Women is one of our most enduring since almost 2015. And I remember being very passionate about partnering with UN Women, given your work around the world, your commitment to ending violence against women, the model that the UN agency has. It was UNIFEM at the time, if I recall. And so really wonderful as a CEO of UN Women Australia to have you join us today. Can I perhaps open up by just asking you, what does UN Women do? And I'll just preface that by asking, the UN system, I think, is a mystery for most people. If you could perhaps demystify it to some degree and sort of explain the core function of UN Women itself, I think would be very helpful to kick off our conversation.
Sure, Jeremy. Well, yes, as you alluded to, the United Nations is a large entity, and UN Women is one of many United Nations agencies, and UN Women Australia is a representative of that agency here in Australia. And so our work is largely tasked with helping work across a number of areas, but fundamentally to achieve SDG, or Sustainable Development Goal number 5, which is to achieve gender equality in our lifetime, which at current rates is a fairly elusive target. And it's a target that we work with a range of partners and stakeholders, like the Australian government, like private sector partners, to really try and change behaviours, attitudes, systems, policies, to ensure that women are included and are equally valued both at work, at home, and in the community. And so in doing that, we work across a number of priorities, predominantly around the empowerment of women in leadership and representation, ensuring that women are safe in terms of crises. A core priority also is ending violence against women, because we know that impacts and has a range of impacts for women wherever they are, as well as ensuring women's peace and security wherever they live and work. So it's a fairly broad remit, as you can appreciate, and the United Nations is made up of a number of member states, representative of countries all across the world who are committed to achieving those global goals, the SDGs I referred to earlier. So not a small task, not a small goal, and certainly not to be achieved and won't be achieved on its own. So partners are really important in that part of the work that we do.
We're going to dive shortly into the recent trip that I made to visit your work in Papua New Guinea, and I think that's a important example of some of the profound challenges still facing women and girls around the world. You just mentioned that we have a long way to go to meet the SDGs. Why do you believe that is? And what do you think are some of the main challenges holding back women and girls? I mean, we have the data overwhelmingly. It's been with INGOs now for many years, and obviously Me Too thrust this issue into the global spotlight, yet still in Australia and around the world, there are profound systemic challenges holding back the full empowerment of women and girls. How would you define that, and what do you think are the key challenges, and what do we need to do to really move the needle in a wholesale way, such that we're not having this conversation now, 50 years from now, looking at the same metrics?
Well, that's a huge question, Jeremy, and I'll do my best to try and address some components of that. But firstly, to start with, the SDGs are global goals. So basically, the world signed up to achieving these goals. And one of them, which is at the core to achieving every other of the 17 SDGs, is gender equality. And we know that the challenges and the issues are that when women are excluded and aren't able to fully participate in whatever area of society, of community, of work or play, we know that we're not working to our full potential. And by we, I mean the community, the nations, the countries where we live and work. So it's really important that we look at what are those barriers, as you alluded to a little bit earlier. What are the things that are holding women back? And a lot of them are systemic, they are structural, they are historical, they are behavioural, and they are attitudinal. In other words, as long as we continue to think that women, for example, in any environment have less value, or that subjecting women to violence is appropriate, then we will never, ever achieve gender equality. So there's a range of levers, there's a range of things we can do, all of us, to really change and shift what I believe is the fundamental inequity and inequality, and that is around how women are perceived and viewed and the value that they bring. And that does vary from country to country, and different countries have, unfortunately, higher statistics and rates of violence, for example, than others. But universally, the barriers for women being valued and participating equally are pretty consistent, and that is around their financial empowerment and their access to financial systems and services, their ability to hold leadership roles and be representative in their communities. And when we talk about leadership, we're not talking about global governments. We're talking about leadership at its most basic, that women have a voice, and they also have a voice in determining what happens to them, for them, and often by them, as opposed to being the beneficiaries or recipients of what is considered to be appropriate for women. So it's really important to have women at the table, and that goes to the fundamental core of equality and really a fundamental approach to human rights, irrespective of gender.
It's obviously a complex equation. I often go back to having been to Rwanda and seeing how women and girls have largely rebuilt Rwanda post-genocide to now be the fastest growing economy in Africa, or at least it was at the time when I visited, and one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It's an extraordinary case study on how if you let women become the majority in parliament, if you unleash their potential in the public, private and civil sectors, what can that achieve? You're obviously very passionate about this. It's something we both share. What inspired you to be in this role, to work as a CEO of UN Women Australia?
Well, I think when I look back, I'm often asked that question, but it really is a history of, I think, and fundamentally starting with from a position of fairness and equality. And, you know, what does that look like wherever you are? And as a young woman starting out in a professional career many, many years ago, like a lot of women, I experienced marginalization, I experienced harassment, I experienced, a quietening of my own voice, which I did voluntarily because there were, concerns and considerations around my own ability to be able to convey and to be able to speak on behalf of others, or even on behalf of myself. So, I don't think they are, I'm a white woman of privilege. So when you consider the things that I have had to endure, and then you look at the same and even more compelling challenges that are facing women across the world, it's hard not to be moved, and it's hard not to want to step in and be a voice for women and girls. And I have had a long history in my career of working for women and girls. So it wasn't some grand plan. I think it was just fundamentally, I was just gravitated towards impact and working for for-purpose organizations. And that's always, to some extent, involved women and children, probably just and intuitively because they are the most marginalized. So it's more of a, I think, again, that fundamental equity conversation and equality, and being really considerate of what that looks like and the changes that are available to us, and the impact we can have. So I think really having a purpose and impact is at the core of certainly my career and my work to date. So that's what's led me to here, which I'm delighted to be part of the UN system again and working on behalf of women wherever they are to address inequality they face.
And I appreciate you sharing that. It is extraordinary how women, as you say, of privilege, strong, educated, almost every woman, at least that I've met, has a story about some form of abuse or diminishment or harassment. It can be subtle, it can be pervasive, it can obviously also be dangerous and even deadly. And this is going on. I mean, this is, if we were to sort of descend from a spaceship and look at male violence against women, I'm going to call it largely really what it is, we would see it for what it is. It is the most systemic human rights abuse in the world that's happening every day, everywhere. And we're going to touch on that very shortly. I mean, if one woman a week was being killed from a disease, and indeed we responded as we needed to during COVID, you know, there would be an enormous governmental and private sector approach to this, but it happens quietly in Australia almost every week of the year. Can we circle back to what makes UN Women unique in respect to its methodology and focus and how you work on the ground? Because again, this is kind of where, you know, no pun intended, the rubber hits the road around how do the services get delivered? And we'll touch shortly on what I was really privileged to witness your work in PNG. But, you know, I think it's really valuable to begin to erode some of the very simplistic beliefs around the NGO sector. You know, where does the money go? You know, this notion about admin fees, as if somehow staff shouldn't be paid, the true cost of delivering aid, the true cost of reporting and improving programs. It's complex work. It's difficult work. If you could perhaps shine a light on how you engage local partners and how you work as an agency, I think that would be very compelling to hear from you.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, we are a United Nations agency, and UN Women works in a range of countries and always with local partners. So it's really important that, you know, if we look traditionally at humanitarian development and international development and assistance, in decades ago, it was very much aid for the sake of, we'll throw money at a problem and see if it fixes it. I think we've moved a long way from there, and I think UN Women's approach very much, and it's not unique, I have to say, you know, most other NGOs working in this space as well are doing similar work, but it's really based on looking at, you know, a 360-degree view of women and what impacts them, having the data and the analysis and the understanding of what the local situation looks like. You cannot simply take an intervention that might have been successful in Rwanda and supplant it and take it to PNG. You need a community basis to be able to work with the community, and no change will ever come unless you certainly have the engagement of the community and those key stakeholders in it. So I think UN Women's approach very much is to work in community, to work with local partners, to have women at the table. It's really difficult for an organisation like ours to say, we absolutely believe that a priority is that women should have a voice and women should be in leadership positions, and then to disregard them when it comes to determining how they will live their lives, how they'll be protected. So we need to walk the talk. We need to be true to our mission. And that very much is about being inclusive and ensuring that women are at the core and at the heart of whatever programs, whatever initiatives are designed and developed by women, for women, in their own circumstances. And so that's a really important aspect to what we do, and others like us, and working in partnership with local community organisations. You know, we don't helicopter in and say, this is how you do it, this is how we can change the world. It is a consultative process based on evidence, based on really solid methodology that has been garnered over decades, but really to ensure that women are at the core of the initiatives and the programs that are developed for their inclusion. So I think that's really what's key to UN Women's success, and organisations like ours, that you start with the people that, you know, are really most impacted, and let them be co-designs, if not lead designers, on how we address and change those factors, but also then how we bring others in the community along with us, because you can have the most proactive and well thought out plan, but if you don't have the community and the key stakeholders at the table either, then it's often hard to create change. So really looking at impact and purpose as our profit, right? So you talk to the important conversations, and they continue to bubble up around the cost of delivering these programs. Yes, there is a cost, but look at the returns. Look at the social returns on investment. Look at what it means for communities. Look at how we can lift the whole GDP of countries. We know that inclusion of women in the workforce more broadly will lift the productivity of countries. So we often focus on what are we spending, but so often we negate the impact and the opportunity for what that return can engender. So, and sometimes it's hard to quantify that. And people are used to dealing with things in black and white. But when we look about impact and purpose, it's really about how can we improve the lives of women and girls, by extension, and families and communities, so that they can prosper. Because we know that if we're prospering, that has a knock-on impact, that has a flow-on benefit beyond borders and across the globe. So it's really important that we work from the community level, but that we can look at replicating those initiatives and that impact is felt across the globe, even on the smallest intervention. So I hope that explains a little bit about how we work, but fundamentally, women are at the core of what we do and have to be.
100%. It is so interesting that the binary lens through which we view returns, financial returns,
Absolutely.
and the expectation of immediate financial returns, without perhaps understanding that by empowering women in communities, their ability to contribute meaningfully to the economy is enormous. And just to share the briefest example, as I think an interesting one around also, as I know your work does, engages men to understand the benefits of empowering women in their communities. I remember just before COVID, I was in Bangladesh with the Hunger Project, and the fully Bangladeshi team, and they're trying to end the marriage of girls. And the way they did that was by working slowly in the communities and working with the village elders, who were all men, to help them understand the benefit of ensuring their daughters and the girls in the village received a full education, and that marrying off girls was a cultural practice, not a Quranic practice, and therefore could be changed. And so, as you say, that holistic approach to engaging the fuller community, and often at a leadership level, does still in the developing world mean talking to men, engaging men on that journey, helping men understand the benefits, and that the whole village and the whole community, and ultimately the entire country, benefits from something as well, not small, but starting at a grassroots level, ensuring that girls stay in school.
Absolutely.
What would you say some of the unique challenges and joys are of your work, Simone?
There's many challenges. I'm having a laugh because when you look at challenges and joys, I mean, the joy is even thinking for a moment that you could have a positive impact on someone's life. And so I think for me, that's the fundamental driver for why people like me work in this space, why people like you, Jeremy, are involved in this space. And so I have to be honest, I have more frustrations than I have joys. But when I look at the programs and the work that we do, and then you meet the women and you see that there are gains, and you think you can look at women in markets in Pacific Island countries who are now safe as a result of small interventions like creating a safe place for them to sleep overnight when they go to markets, whereas previously they were going to markets and at risk of violence and abuse on their way to market. Safety and security, some really simple interventions can actually mean the difference between a family's livelihood even returning from the markets in terms of the money that's generated at market. Really simple things like that. They're the joys, because you can see, yes, this work is having an impact. And also this ability and the feeling that you are part of something bigger. I mean, I think everybody wants, we talk about our to-do list. I like to think about a to-be list. What do I want to be, and what do I want to leave behind? And for me and most other people that work in this sector, I think it's really driven by a desire to be part of change and a better world for everybody. And that sounds very lofty and certainly tough to achieve. But I know that, it's really important. I mean, Jeremy, I was fascinated by the fact that, you came to UN Women and said, look, I really want to visit PNG. I really want to understand it from a male perspective. So, as you said, it takes all of us. Gender equality is not a binary proposition. It's not women versus men or women or men. It's all of us working together. And so I'm now going to turn the tables a little bit on you, Jeremy, because I know that from the other side of the table, you have a really deep and driving passion around a lot of the work that we do. And I'm really interested in what the catalyst for you was to take time out of your day-to-day to travel to PNG to understand what was going on there, and certainly the impact of violence on women, and the fact that it's often hidden and or sanitized. And I don't mean just in PNG, but I mean globally. So I'm really keen to hear now a bit from you, because I'm getting a bit sick of my own voice, to hear a little bit about what was the catalyst for you as a man to really, A, work in this space, and then B, go on field visits and missions to really understand at its most core what are the impacts on women in countries like PNG and the impacts of violence on women. So maybe you could share that from your perspective.
So you're interviewing me now?
I am, apparently. Yeah, I've got a few questions
great.
for you, Jerry. I get sick of talking, so it's over to you.
I'm up for that, sure. Okay, so I mean, just very briefly, I lived in Latin America in my early 20s, and I saw a lot of violence against women. Saw it, heard it, kind of experienced it through a girlfriend's ex-partner coming after both of us with a knife one night, and having to kind of flee into the night. This was in Cuba to relative safety, and just quite traumatized by that. And then starting to travel around the world, and every country I had the opportunity to go to, I went to meet NGOs and small grassroots organizations. I realized there was an enormous gap in my knowledge around this space, and I wanted to understand, how is it possible that where I come from, violence against women is an aberration, indeed a crime, whereas in many countries in the world it is, as I just saw and was explained in Papua New Guinea, quote unquote daily business, everyday business. What is occurring at a systemic level, at a cultural level, at the level of belief systems? How do religions sanction violence? How do political structures keep determining that women are subordinate to men? And so it's complex, and I wanted to begin to know. I think it's a journey of beginning. It's a journey of learning. It's been a journey of understanding my own privilege as a wide educated male, coming from a loving family, and just realizing that alone, how rare that is around the world. And so it was I saw, I guess, an opportunity to, in meeting with these NGOs, of course, they all needed more money to scale their work. And so I thought, I'm just one person, and, even if I had millions to give, it would only have a limited effect. So how do we use business as a force for good? How do we leverage the power of the markets and the levers of the markets to create sustainable long-term change by helping fund these incredible NGOs that are real experts in their field? And I think that's a really important point. I mean, I met, like yourself, some incredible impact leaders around the world who are so deeply committed. And one thing I will say is that there's a great irony to all this, because, they're not there for the money, but they're some of the most joyful, purposeful, passionate people I've met. They know why they're getting up each day. They often know why they were born. It's to do this work. If there's two great questions, or two great gifts, one is the day you were born, and the second one is the day you find out why. It seems that these impact leaders like yourself have worked it out, and what a gift to yourself to be able to wake up each day. And as I've met and I've walked alongside these people and gone out to see their work, and it's bloody hard work. It's complex work, as you know, working with communities. You're sometimes up against thousands of years of belief systems, right? That actually believe that women are subordinate, that believe that girls do not need an education or are not valuable enough, that believe that girls are one of their largest values is for sexual service to men. I mean, it is extraordinary what still goes on around the world, and I've seen it firsthand, and it's traumatic. And we're all poorer because of it. Our countries are poorer, our psychology is poorer. All metrics, all outcomes actually suffer as a result of, you look at the most dysfunctional countries in the world, it's where women are hidden away, where girls are denied education, where they're denied access to being, look at what's happening in Afghanistan again. It's just breathtaking. And how kind of men sanction this stuff and believe it. You really need to believe in something absolutely supernatural to think or somehow have this. I mean, it's another conversation around men's fear of the power of women, and therefore, create structures that have been normalized over time in order to maintain women and girls as second-class citizens. But ultimately, everyone is poorer as a result. So yeah, that was sort of the foundation to I guess my journey, and then working out how do we create a platform that engages businesses. How do we build it practically so that we can talk a very practical business language, talk to them about the benefits, the marketing benefits, the growth, the engagement, the importance of having a broader purpose beyond product they can build into their customer journey. And in doing so, create that long-term funding for incredible NGOs.
Yeah. And I'm fascinated by that as well, having worked in sustainability, Jeremy, is that, I think the private sector and business in general, a contribution to and or giving back is almost part of most brands' DNAs. And, it's treated with different organizations in different ways. But I'm also incredibly proud of, the number of retailers who are also involved in something like I Equals Change, where they are literally contributing income that they would otherwise pocket as a for-profit organisation to reinvest back in communities and issues that are important to their customer base. And I think that's a really interesting shift because, 20 years ago, that wasn't happening as much, whereas it feels now like the fundamental license to operate is a part of any brand proposition for private sector and or certainly in the retail space and others. Do you see that? I mean, you have a huge range of partners on the I Equals Change platform. What do you think their drivers are?
So like I asked you a big question at the beginning. That's also a big question.
Your turn now.
Okay. So, well, there's a number of things happening. I mean, 10 years ago, no one wanted to talk to me. It was this cute donation idea, right? It's emerged as a simple and powerful way that businesses can build their giving or begin giving back. And still most are not on this journey, actually. They're looking at it now and they're realizing that they must communicate clearly their impact, their sustainability, address their ESG goals and the expectations of stakeholders. But it definitely hasn't been the case up until now. I mean, they're bigger businesses, yes, there's a number of brands that have been doing it. Traditionally, they wrote a check at the end of the year, or it was a page on the back end of a website saying we support or we give 1% of proceeds, which no one knows what it means. The fundamental shift, I'd say, is we're all aware now. I mean, you'd have to be living with your head in the sand, like practically in the sand, to not be aware that we're living in a unique and fragile time. And that in order to earn and continue to have a social license to operate, you have to be telling a bigger story beyond product. You have to be communicating your purpose, and you have to be engaging your customers in that in order to meaningfully differentiate. So at a systems level, we're not going to have sustainable communities to purchase our goods and services unless we actually invest back in the environment and the community, which ultimately supports our businesses. Now, that's a long-term play, and I think is a challenge for most business leaders to kind of invest in. But what is investable is how is this valuable as a business proposition? How does this drive engagement and drive growth, drive loyalty? How does it enable businesses to have a bigger conversation beyond product and promotion, to talk about their purpose, talk about the impact, talk about the number of lives changed, show some of the videos and images, for example, that we just went recently and gathered in PNG. And so I think there is a lot of goodwill there. Like, no business is saying we don't want to do this. It's just been a question of priorities. This hasn't been a priority. It's becoming a priority. And I think generally, businesses, it's just manned by people, right? And well-meaning people, of course, who are doing their best to run an organization that needs to be profitable in order to exist. So everyone is just dealing with cascading priorities in their workplace. And so, what has been a wholesale shift, I'd say, especially for us in Australia, I think we were and still are, of course, the lucky country, but it wasn't until, fires, floods and COVID have we had that visceral experience as Australians of what it means to be living with a threat, a real and immediate threat. Most of us have not known great suffering, of course, outside of our perhaps external situation. There's never been an existential threat as there is now. And we've lived it and we're living it. And the next one is just around the corner. And so I think for what we do, it is an exciting time in that, our goal is to deliver as much funding as possible to our NGO partners, to UN Women. And yet we have to really speak so we wear two very different hats. We have to be very pragmatic when we talk to businesses, and like even now we're going out to unlock new case studies around how it drives growth. I mean, what we have seen in this time is that we work with a lot of e-commerce retailers, and e-commerce is, it was great during COVID when we were all sitting at home and buying yoga pants. It's not so much anymore.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing, sadly, a lot of retailers pull back their commitment to programs like this, which is obviously having an impact on funding. And so our job is really to watch that and say, well, okay, how do we now double down and really show businesses that in this time they need to maintain that commitment, and here's the benefit. And so, we remain very pragmatic, and we have to be around just the data, how it's driving growth, how customers are responding to these kinds of initiatives. And so it is a balancing act between, talking about the impact and saying, do this because it's the right thing to do, your customers care, your staff care, and at the same time, we have to help them address their bottom line and make sure that it makes sense for them.
You talked a little bit about storytelling, which I think is absolutely paramount to whenever I talk to anybody about what it is we do, is trying to bring to life the either enormity of the challenge or the barriers that women face. And I think there's a real art in telling those stories. I know that you went recently to Papua New Guinea. What stands out from your experiences there in terms of the stories you heard? Because firsthand, it can be incredibly confronting and challenging. It can also be joyous and give you hope that maybe, we are all heading in the right direction as a planet. But I'm interested just in your feedback from your time in PNG. What sort of stands out from your experiences there and the stories that you heard? And did that inspire you, fire you up to sort of do more? Did it, what sort of impact it had on you personally, but also just how you went about those whole storytelling journey while you were there? And any of the stories that you heard would be really interesting to hear, I think.
So I've done these trips a number of times, and where the power is in going directly into the field and hearing from those people who are effectively the beneficiaries of your programs, and telling that personal story. We can hear that 90% of women in the highlands of Papua New Guinea experience violence as everyday business, but until we meet someone and we hear her story, it suddenly becomes very alive. And I met with Erica, who runs a small grassroots organization in Goroka in the highlands. And she basically shared, killing women, torturing women, accusing women of sorcery is everyday business. And women are coming in every day bearing the scars of men's violence against women. The highlands of Papua New Guinea, it was absolutely shocking, is an epicenter for violence against women in the world. If we largely understand that 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual abuse in their lifetime. In Papua New Guinea, it's 90% of women regularly. Apparently, almost 50% of women experience rape at some point in their lives in Papua New Guinea. There are accusations of sorcery where a few times a month, if someone dies in a village simply because they were old or sick, it's quite common a woman in a neighboring village is accused that she put a spell on that person and is responsible for their death, and therefore that woman will be captured, tortured, and maybe even killed. Now, it's hard for us to get our heads around this, but this is the closest country to Australia. Like, it's 4 kilometres. You can get your dinghy out and, you know, drive there. It's a 3-hour flight from Brisbane, right, to Port Moresby, and you land in another world. And I think it's hard because, you know, we're very tribal at the end of the day, and our circle of empathy is kind of limited to the, you know, the people we love, and then our co-workers and perhaps our broader community. And it's very, what we don't see doesn't largely touch us. And yet all of us could have been any one of these people under different circumstances.
Yeah.
And we just have to challenge our own imagination to imagine that a girl in Papua New Guinea could have been our daughter. We indeed could have been born ourselves under a different star in the highlands of Papua New Guinea and having to deal with this every day. And so, you know, we are the beneficiaries of so much privilege when we start to speak relatively about what's happening in the developing world. And if it's okay, perhaps I'll just share a few pictures from the trip, because I think that really brings it to life in a much more powerful way. Are you able to see my screen?
I can, yeah.
So, Simone, I mean, this has been a powerful partnership. We've raised over $365,000. We've impacted the lives of approximately 51,000 people in the communities in which we're supporting your work. And so far, we've done one content mission just recently to Papua New Guinea. And these are some of the pictures I took recently on this trip. And I'll come back to that. I mean, this is the live page just showing, for anyone who's watching, who's a business, who is thinking about how they could support the incredible work UN Women are doing. We support 2 projects, one in Papua New Guinea and a global one, which is a fund that is ready to deploy when natural disasters happen and women are disproportionately affected in times of natural disasters. That is a fund to support them. So this just gives you a quick snapshot into the lives of women and children amongst our closest neighbours. So this is in Goroka. This is in Gordon's Market. This is the largest open air market in the South Pacific, where women come to sell their fruit, their vegetables, their wares. They're mostly women at the market selling. And one of the big challenges has been for women is, I mean, again, it's hard for us to imagine how this is even possible, but it's a dangerous area. And so when women would walk home late in the day with the money they would earn, they were often at risk of being physically or even sexually abused, or at least having the money stolen that they would earn in the market. And so working with UN Women and your partners there, a small banking facility has been established so that women can leave their money in the market safely, the money they've earned. And obviously we know that it's so important that women have access to the money, because we know that they spend about 90% of it back into their own family, into their daughter's education, into the health of their children. Whereas statistically, men spend about 50 to 60% of what they earn on themselves and invest the rest in their family. So a really significant disproportionate impact when women are not only empowered to run their own businesses, scale their own businesses, but of course, they need to be able to maintain access to the finances that they earn. This is up in the Highlands. We met Christine. That's her mum standing over her. Her mum runs the Safe House. This is in the Lufa district in the Eastern Highlands of PNG. I think this picture's particularly powerful because neither of these women look particularly happy. And I'll tell you why. Christine had when we arrived, we were told that we would get a chance to meet Christine. She's 9 months pregnant and that she was just about to come back from the clinic. Over an hour later, she came back and we interviewed her, and it turns out she is worried that her baby is not healthy. She is overdue. She's been kicked in the stomach, we were told 3 times, and she's worried her baby might be born stillborn or have some other issue. And so she's gone to the clinic, and her mother's obviously very concerned about her. Her mum already runs this safe house for women who are escaping domestic violence or sorcery accusations in the Highlands. And then we asked to go up to the clinic. And this is a really sweet young woman we met who was so proud to show us her newborn baby. And it was just wonderful to see how, the men were gathering, and, as any community, right? They were very excited that this baby had been born healthily in the community. But then, Simone, I said, look, can we go and visit this clinic? And it wasn't a 20-minute drive away. It was a 20-minute walk up a mountain in the heat. And Christine had been up and back from that mountain clinic by herself. And this is a woman who's over 9 months pregnant. And I said, for God's sake, couldn't someone find it? No, we don't have a car. We don't have any way to take her to the clinic. And when we got to the clinic, this is what this clinic is. It's, I mean, I was almost in tears when I saw this. It's one, as you can see, dirty bed in the corner. There's no sterilization. There's a tap that didn't work. They took running water out of a tank. There's no electricity. And we were basically told that, and there's no sterilization. And so this is where she went to kind of get her checkup done. But you can see the state of the clinic in which this happens. And so it's very common. This is a country which has the second highest rate of infant and maternal death in the world after Sierra Leone. Now just think about that for a moment. I mean, the country with the highest risk to women and girls is in Africa. The second highest country is on our doorstep. Women have about a 1 in 20 chance, if they can't access a supervised birth, of dying in childbirth. In Australia, that number is 1 in 20,000.
Yeah, crazy, isn't it? I think that's it's the comparison, isn't it? When you look at it, I mean, sometimes we get buried in the statistics, but when you hear about the impact on one woman's life and her desire to give birth to a happy, healthy baby, I mean, that's universal. For a community to want to welcome a happy, healthy child into the community is not something that is relegated to Australia or Fiji. I mean, it is a universal truth. So when you see women being impacted and not being able to get the kind of care that we demand, that's the inequities. They're the injustices that I see every day, and question, how can we continue to turn an eye and a blind eye away from this just because we're lucky enough for it not to be our reality? So I think, you talked about, that magic E word around empathy, and really feeling that empathy and that desire to help others by sheer virtue of the fact that we were quite simply born in a more fortunate environment. Now, that doesn't mean everybody needs to, down tools and and only focus on those areas and issues, but things that are impacting women everywhere, and our desires as women and families and communities and men to have happy, healthy, thriving families, that's universal. So what are we all doing to try and make that a more equal playing field, to make that more available? And I suppose that's the importance of collaborations like ours, Jeremy, where and things like the support that we get from the Australian government, who are a really strong supporter and who invest regularly in programs and initiatives in the region for that very reason, because we know from even at a government level that happy, healthy communities are just better. They're better for the communities. They are more productive. They are more efficient. And when we talk about productivity and efficiency, we often think about, in the boardroom, in the office. We're talking about productivity and efficiency at its most basic, and that is around being able to develop and generate happy and healthy communities that do prosper, whatever the scale of finance they have, or whatever money they have available to them, and the economics of that are super important. But that we also need to be protected, and I think that that's the fundamental thing that we both continue to work for. I think in organisations like ours, to ensure that all Australians understand that these things are happening on our doorstep. As you mentioned, PNG is less than 4 k's away from us, but they're also happening in our communities here. And when I hear about things like the prevalence of violence against women in this country and the fact that we turn a blind eye, that continues to just knock me over, because how can we abide by that? What kind of country in Australia do we want to live in? What's the kind of future we want for our daughters and our sisters and our mothers? The same future that women in PNG want, a happy, healthy, safe future for their daughters, for their sisters, for their mothers. And so until we can guarantee that, we've got to have a good hard look at ourselves and say, well, what can we be doing to change that dynamic? And not just here in Australia, but in countries and for women and communities that really need it. And so, it's been fabulous being able to talk to you today about that. We're sitting at the 2nd year anniversary of the invasion of Afghanistan by the Taliban, and to look at what's happening to women there, the violence that continually happens against women, the fact that women are being erased from the face of Afghanistan, they are being hidden, they are told not to go to school. It makes me, I just rattle my head some days and say, how is it we're living in 2023 and these things are happening globally? So I, like you, Jeremy, share a hope that we can all do better, lean in, stand up, step in, whatever it takes in whatever format we live and work in, to really try and create a better future for all women, and by extension communities, right? Because that's what we're all here for.
Yeah, 100%. And I think if we can begin from the basic understanding that everyone does care about something, that everyone,
absolutely,
if given the opportunity for it to be made simple, would rather buy from a business that gives back over one that does not, then they would. And that's what the data is bearing out. It's like, how do we actually harness the power of our human empathy in this time? Are you able to see this platform, Sadashi?
Yeah.
So I think it's just helpful in this moment to show how simple we've made it.
Yeah.
So, for example, if someone shops from Sadashi and wants to give Sadashi's dollar back to end violence against women, to support UN Women, it's a one-click send, and that is it. They shop from Sadashi. They can then add another couple of dollars of their own money if they wish to, and then see the impact which leads to Sadashi's live impact page, to be able to see in real time how much Sadashi has raised and where it's going. And who's behind the brand? Who is the founder or the team who is passionate about giving back to women and girls? And so I think I think you asked me before about businesses, and what we've learned at I Could Change is the power of making it simple.
Yeah,
it's powerful. All of us, and I think it's fair to say, well, almost all of us, if given the choice, would love our businesses to be able to contribute and love to buy from businesses that give back. And overwhelmingly, staff and teams, the war on talent, right? If you want to attract and retain great people, you need to inspire them by what you stand for. And profit alone, or even earning a salary alone, is not enough. People are, I think, there's a raising of consciousness, and we're increasingly aware of, none of us are here for a long time, and we want to live meaningful lives, and we give our best hours to our workplace. Indeed, at the best years of our lives, when we're most sort of active. And so, we're not all going to be running social impact organizations, and indeed we shouldn't be. We should also be actually working from within inside as entrepreneurs to inspire our, senior executives to say, how can we contribute to being part of the solution? How can we give back? How can that be transparent to all of our stakeholders? How can we tell a bigger story? And as we're seeing, how can they also grow? And so it's a really critical time on the planet. Simone, I'm just wondering if you could bridge that gap for our listeners around how the empowerment of women and girls and climate change are interconnected. Because, of course, there's no silver bullet here, but there is a really interesting and compelling connection between these two great challenges. Could you share what your understanding is of that?
Sure, and I'll preface this by saying I'm not obviously an environmental scientist, but I think it's probably, I'm going to answer that slightly differently, because one of the things I'm struck by continually is that we compartmentalize these huge challenges that we face as a globe, as a human race, and it's climate, or it's equality, or it's poverty, or it's all of these things. And the fact is that we know that climate and the climate emergency and the impact on livelihoods and families through climate are exacerbating some of those other indicators that are making it more difficult, to survive and thrive. So it's the compartmentalization of these issues. They're all issues that will continue to face us. If we aren't living on a healthy planet, we will absolutely, regardless of gender equality, we will cease to exist. So it's not that one is more important than the other, but again, it goes to what are the big ticket items that we all need to work towards and really lean in towards and focus on. And we will not have, and we won't have any future unless we address the issues and the impacts of climate change. We know that women and families in the Pacific, for example, are at risk of quite literally not having a place to live to. And I mean that at its most basic when you talk about rising sea levels and other things. And then when you look at the severe weather occurrences that we're having and the impact on people on a daily basis, from the wildfires in Europe through to most recently in Maui, and how that impacts on people, on livelihoods, on things like tourism, we can't decouple them anymore. It's part of who we are, the environment within which we live. We have to sort out climate change. We have to respond. We have to improve our emissions. And to do that, again, we need all of us. And we know that women are impacted by climate because usually in the case of climate disasters, women and children die at higher rates. We know they suffer more from those climactic events. So it's all interdependent. It's all interrelated. So it's absolutely imperative that we look after this planet, because if we don't, we will literally have nowhere to live. And the fact is that regardless of whether you're male or female, the fundamental premise is still the same, that we need to be able to survive and thrive, and we need a thriving environment to be able to do that. The way we farm, the way we live, the way we consume are all super important and codependent on equality and how that plays out in a broader sense. So, these are really big, hairy, audacious goals. That's why they are the Sustainable Development Goals, and they're why the world signed up to do something about them. But the pace of change and our appetites seem to wane on some of these things. So while we're distracted over here with, what's the next best thing on, entertainment channels, we also need to be focusing on what's happening around us every day, and what are we doing every day to address and redress these global challenges. Because if we don't, we simply won't leave a future or a planet to the next generation. And that's probably the things that scares me the most.
And scientists are shocked at how quickly these weather events are now unfolding. And we know that in times of disasters, women and girls are disproportionately impacted.
Absolutely.
Sexual violence increases. There's a number of metrics in which they are overwhelmingly impacted. So let's talk funding briefly for your work, because I'm aware of taking up a lot of your time, Simone, and I wanted to go back to saving the world, or at least having an impact on the lives of women and girls. So I Could Change has raised almost $370,000. Can you share what does funding like this do for the organisation and the people that you serve?
Look, at its most basic, it can literally be the difference between survival or not, or a transition out of a disaster or not. Something as simple as what we call our care kits or our dignity kits, which we give to women in the time of emergency. I often talk to people and say, okay, so when an emergency happens, what do? You run out of the house, you try to get somewhere safe. And for women, there's a whole nother range of, and ensuring that the kids are safe, that we're all safe, that we get to higher ground or whatever that looks like. But often women are displaced. We saw women in Afghanistan who were literally forced out of their homes. We saw women in the Ukraine who were forced to leave their country with little more than a wheelie bag when you look at the news. And so there are specific needs for women. There are things as simple as sanitary items, as underwear, feminine hygiene products, things like that. Things that can maintain the dignity of a woman when she's under threat. They sound like super simple interventions, but if you're a woman, you know what it's like. And you need to be able to feel that in an emergency that there is some sense of control that you can have. So, we always get taken down the road of, the investment, the funds, and what do they deliver? And, the fact is they deliver impact, they deliver benefit, they deliver protection, they deliver surety around livelihoods. That's what that is, investment. And I suppose sometimes, look, I work in an organisation and we are tasked with raising funds for our programs. So it's a very big part of who we are. But I also hate to think the fact that global change is reduced to the size of $1 or a contribution. We can have an impact. Don't get me wrong. We absolutely need the money, and we need the money to be able to respond when emergencies happen. We need the money to create programs so that we can help women be more financially literate in markets in PNG. We need funds so that we can ensure women are protected, quite literally, when they go to market. We need funds so that we can help women address the barriers that they face every day, but so that they can be self-sustaining. That's the importance of the dollar you contribute to organisations like UN Women. And, there's a lot of conversations now about what would happen if we shook up the whole funding model for humanitarian assistance for the work that organisations like ours do. What would that look like? And let's move away from, what's been spent on overhead. I mean, you talk to any business and they talk about overhead. It's not something, you can't have any overhead. I've had 100 conversations with potential funders over the years that have said to me, well, we'd like a thorough monitoring and reporting and evaluation of which is part of how we work. That's not a problem. And we'd like this report. Okay, well, to deliver that and the data that you need, there's going to be a 10% overhead ratio, and they're gobsmacked. Well, no, I don't want to pay for the monitoring, the reporting, but I want it to be part of what you deliver to us. Everything costs money. Every aspect of raising $1, we spend $1 to raise 3, hopefully. There is a cost of raising funds. There is a cost of running programs. And I do get incredibly frustrated by the fact that people think somehow people working in the sector that I work in should do it for free. It's part of the cost of doing business. It's part of the service delivery that we provide. And so when you think about the dollar you contribute, think about the good, think about the social return that is going to generate. And I guarantee you that organisations like ours are doing absolutely the best they can with the minimum cost, but things cost. So use your dollars widely, contribute to organisations like ours that actually have the efficacy and the evidence base to support what they're doing, but know that that is an investment in a social return that is sometimes hard to define. And so I just encourage people to be a little bit more altruistic and expansive in their thinking around what it actually means to contribute and donate to organisations and what you want to see as a result of that. Because the biggest changes are often the ones that you can't see. Things like access to, to a safe place to put your money at the market that you just spoke to are in PNG. So it's really important to try not to focus so much on, okay, is that money being spent wisely? There are organisations that do this. We are more regulated in this country around our charities and the ACNC and how we work around that than probably most other countries in the world. And know that and be confident in the fact that organisations like ours do what we do every day. We do it usually off the smell of a rag, and we do it to deliver impact. And our profit is purpose. So if you think about a traditional business environment around profit and loss, our profit is impact, and our loss is quite literally can be the loss of life. So when you think about it in that sort of equation or scale, your dollars are absolutely well spent. So be the change.
Well said, Simone. I often say just measure the organisation on their impact,
Absolutely.
not the overhead.
Yeah.
They're running an organisation that needs to pay good people to do good work. It's really simple. And so I notice we're at time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. For any businesses or people on this call who want to inspire other businesses, I Could Change is a very simple way in which either a retailer or a professional services firm, we're now beginning to work with lawyers and accountants and consultants who can also bring to life their giving with a live page on their websites. I Could Change is a uniquely simple way to fund extraordinary organisations like UN Women. And Simone, just before we leave, just a final question, if I may. In many years from now, when you look back on your professional life, what will you be most proud of?
That's a great question. I suppose it's probably more on you said my professional life, so I suppose in terms of what I do, but I think as a woman and as a mother, the proudest moment will be when I know that my daughters have a better future ahead of them and better opportunities and are less marginalised and have an equal seat at the table. That's what I hope for the future, that girls and women everywhere will be recognised for the value that they bring and be able to participate, I think, probably fully in every aspect of their life. So that's my future aspiration for my daughters and their daughters and their daughters' daughters. And so we need to get a wriggle on. So let's get busy.
Simone, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jeremy.